It is the Bronze Age. It is the counterculture. We have underground comics having a big influence. It's 1971, and we have underground comics with a lot of drugs, and drugs also make their way into the mainstream, into Marvel and DC. Let's take a look at the books that made the top 10 on the list as horror comes back and other elements up next on this video from Bronzeville Comics. Hello, panelologists. This is Jim from Bronzeville Comics coming to you with another video. And before we get started, please like, comment, subscribe. Check out the description of this video for links to my Whatnot store, my Instagram, my eBay, and my email. And if you see anything on eBay, reach out to me on Instagram or email, and maybe we can do a better deal. So we've been doing this we've had almost 40 installments. And we have another, 54 to go. We're doing the CGC top census count for each year. We're taking a look at the books that have the most blue label copies submitted to CGC. We use cgcdata.com to aggregate that information, and we put it into a top 10 list. We count down the top 10, and then we look at a lot of other books because it gives us an interesting look into comic book history and kind of a snapshot of that time in terms of creators and trends and things that have become popular, remain popular. Now, we're going back 54 years. So we also look at the top 10 books for both Marvel and DC, as well as the top books for all the other major and even minor publishers. Basically, as long as at this point something had a census count of 10 or more, and it's the top book from a publisher, it's making the list. So we got a lot of different publishers. We even have some that are under 10. And a lot of them are undergrounds. In 1971, we're going to kind of see a movement from undergrounds to independence, and the two are a little bit different, but they do kind of come together in the end. So let's take a look at the list. So let's start the list at number 10, and we're talking about Amazing Spider-Man number 98. Now, this is noteworthy, and I mentioned in the intro about drugs. Okay, Stan Lee did the story, Gil Kane, Frank Giacoia did the cover and the art. This is one of the what are called drug issues. So according to Stan Lee, the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare sent him a letter saying, since Marvel Comics and Spider-Man are so popular, and this might have been embellished by Stan over the years, could you do a story warning about the dangers of drug use, recreational drug use? And so he did. He did a 3-part story, and since the Comics Code was really inflexible at this point in time, they did not get the Comic Code Authority stamp. So that makes these issues popular among collectors. A 3-part. This is the 3rd part of the series, the story. And so that becomes an interesting part of comic book history. Now, it is noteworthy that this is the 3rd part of the story, and the cover date is July of 1971. Total number of copies on the census is 2,054. Let's go to number 9 on the list. It's the previous issue. It's number 97. And Lee, Kane, Giacoia, John Romita did the cover with Green Goblin here. So this is the same thing. This is the 2nd part of the 3-part story. Census count of 2,148. Let's go to number 8 on the list. This is Marvel feature number 1, the first appearance of the Defenders. They kind of was a proto-appearance in Submariner 34. Roy Thomas did the story. Neil Adams did the cover. Russ Andrew, Bill Everett, Don Heck, and Frank Giacoia did the interior art. This is a 25-cent book. It is square bound, so it is a little bit harder to get in high grade. There was the first 3 issues of Marvel feature were Defender stories, and then they got their own title in 1972. And so it combined these 3 heroes as the main members of the Defenders. And there is something I'll talk about in terms of the 25 cents a little bit later on. So Marvel feature here, 2,288 copies. Number 7 on the list. We're staying with Marvel, and we're going to Fantastic Four. Total cover by Fantastic Four 112. It's about this John Buscema cover. Hulk versus Thing, always going to be popular. Stan Lee, of course, did the story. He was still writing FF after Kirby had left the year before, and we'll talk about Kirby in just a minute. But this particular book, hard to get in higher grade. There are only a handful, and I think there are less than 10 9/8s on the census. And it has the second fewest 9/8s of any book in the top 10. Again, the black covers, the high grade is going to be difficult. This is probably the first key issue or popular issue after Kirby left the title. It has a census count of 2,512. Let's go to number 6 on the list. And speaking of Kirby, we're going to go over to DC, right? This is Forever People number 1. Jack Kirby did the story and the art with helps by Coletta did the inks. Al Plastino did the Superman face, which we talked about in the last episode. His first full appearance of Darkseid. He had that cameo appearance in 1970 in Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen, 134. And here is his first full appearance, a little bit underrated. So Jack Kirby developed what is known as the Fourth World. Basically, it was a story idea that he was germinating for Thor, where the old gods would die, and you had the Asgardians, the Olympians, etc. In Marvel Comics, he just said the old gods died, and we have these new gods. So he took over Jimmy Olsen. That was part of the storyline that was all somewhat related. And then Forever People is one of the 3 titles. We'll talk about the other 2 as we go through this list. So this is an important book. The Forever People, Kirby's characters, especially these Fourth World characters, often border on or surpass the absurd in terms of their looks. So we have, these members of the Forever People, these kids riding this big, I don't know, dune buggy kind of thing, and you got the cowboy guy, and they kind of almost look like the Village People. But at any rate, this particular book, Forever People number 1, 2,786 on the census, will stay in the same vein, and we're going to go to New Gods number 1 by Jack Kirby. Vinnie Coletta inked the interiors, Julia Koyo inked the cover here. It's the first appearance of Orion, Light Ray, Metron, Highfather, and Calabac. So the New Gods were on the world of New Genesis, and their foes, led by Darkseid, were on Apocalypse. Highfather led New Genesis, Darkseid led Apocalypse, and they had to come in agreement trading their sons to keep peace. So Highfather raised Darkseid's biological son here, Orion, and we'll get to Highfather's son in just a few minutes. This particular book, New Gods number 1, has a census count of 2,902. Up to number 4 on the list, still with DC Comics, this is House of Secrets number 92, the first appearance of a Swamp Thing. Len Wein did the story, and Bernie Wrightson did the art and the cover. A couple of things about this, right? So this is set in the early 1900s. The swamp monster, the model for the woman on the cover was the then Louise Jones, who would later marry Walt Simonson and become known as Louise Simonson, who was a prolific and influential comic book writer in her own right. But Wrightson and Simonson knew each other, kind of this new wave of comic book creators that we had at this point in time that were like Len Wein, that were starting to get their foot in the door. And a lot of them knew each other and kind of had similar ideas. We'll talk about that in a minute. So keep in mind, this is cover date June, July of 1971. It's still a 15 center. And we'll talk about that in relation to DC in just a minute. So it was New Gods and Forever People. Couple of things. Only 3 9/8s on the census. A mean grade of 5.94. I do believe, at least in terms of the mainstream books, I think this is I'm pretty sure, grade for grade, the most expensive book from 1971. And we don't talk a lot about value here, right? I could incorporate values, but this is more about what's popular, and value leads to that. This is obviously going to be graded at lower grades than just a minor key, which might only be graded if you think you're going to get an 8 or better, let's say. You could grade this at a 3 or 4 and still have value. A very coveted book. Now, I have to imagine that people weren't saving House of Secrets the same way they were saving Superman, Batman, or even the Kirby stuff. Because remember, Marvel fans, right, and the way DC marketed it, we're a little bit older now. And I'm talking about this with Scooby-Doo from 1970. Nobody was saving Scooby-Doo because there were no fans of Scooby-Doo that could drive a car yet, right? It was a Saturday morning cartoon that had premiered in 1969. But Marvel Comics is now almost a decade old. By the end of the year, the first issue of Fantastic Four was cover dated November 1961. So we're talking about the 10th anniversary of Marvel Comics at the end of this year. And there were people who, if you're a 9-year-old kid, now you're 19 years old in college, and you have if you're collecting with a purpose. And so DC said Jack Kirby is coming. So people were buying the Kirby books. People were buying Batman and Superman. House of Secrets less so. The cover might have caught some people, but this wasn't a book, I don't think, that had that high a print run compared to the other books like Amazing Spider-Man and, Fantastic Four and the Kirby stuff, right? The number ones. And this is a number 92. It's in the middle of nowhere. But it does show horror. We're going to talk a bit about horror making inroads for both Marvel and DC in the early 1970s. This is just part of the story. 1971 doesn't tell the entire story, but we will talk about that a little bit more in this episode. And so anyway, the other thing is, when Swamp Thing got his own title the following year, and it was a different character. It was Alec Holland, who we thought was Swamp Thing, and that's a whole story until we get to Alan Moore in the 1980s. This is a different Swamp Thing, a different time period. And so, but it is the first appearance of Swamp Thing. And again, keep in mind, this is June, July 1971. And I'm pointing out the cover dates for a reason, because there's always that juxtaposition between Marvel and DC. And we often see, parallels between the two companies. Let's go to number 3 on the list. And this is Batman 232, the first appearance of Ra's al Ghul, Denny O'Neil, Neil Adams, Dick Giordano. Big book, right? And we had talked about in the previous issue where those characters that were in the Batman TV series are not being seen in the Batman comics at this time, at least in the newer stories. Some in the reprints, yes. The reprinted stories, sure. Joker, Penguin, Riddler, Catwoman. You're not seeing them. They're creating new characters. Last year was Man-Bat. This year it's Ra's al Ghul. And I just love this Neil Adams cover. I have one over here. I don't know if you can see it in this shot, but I just got an 8.0 back. It's that green just works really well. And this is, a major Batman key. And we will see, when we get to the 10 DC books, a lot of Neil Adams. Let's face it. We talked about that in 1970. 3,515 copies on the Census. At number 2 on the list is Amazing Spider-Man 100 anniversary issue. Great cover by John Romita. And I think it's the anniversary issue that really sells the book. Right? It makes it as popular as it is. It does have a census count of 4,858. Let's stay with Amazing Spider-Man because it is Morbin time. Top book on the census, 1971, Amazing Spider-Man 101, the first appearance of Morbius the Living Vampire. Roy Thomas story, another character created by Roy Thomas, Gil Kane, Frank Giacoya art, Kane and Romita cover. And you got the 6-armed Spider-Man. Now notice a couple of things I'm going to point out. It says still 15 cents. All right. This is the last 15-cent issue for Marvel. The last 15-cent month at Marvel was October of 1971. And so I'm kind of telling the story in parts, but we're not going chronologically, right? So all the other books in the top 10, other than the First Defenders, are all 15 centers. But now we have to go outside. We're going to go outside the top 10 in just a second. But we will say that this first Morbius, of course, this book got pumped up by the movie, which then it got deflated because the movie was not well received. I didn't think it was that bad. It wasn't Madam Web bad, but the end credits. Whew. At any rate, this book has a census count of 6,519. Let's go to number 11 on the list, because we had 4 DC and 6 Marvel books on the list, so we got to finish out the top 10 for each publisher, because I think that's interesting. At number 11 is the 4th of the Jack Kirby Fourth World books. This is Mr. Miracle number 1, Kirby and Coletta. First appearance of Mr. Miracle and Oberon. And we just got announcement that there's going to be a Mr. Miracle animated series based on the recent Tom King run, which I haven't read yet because I'm like freaking 15 years behind in reading modern comic books. And I have piles of comic books all over the place to read and go through. But summer vacation's coming up, and I'll hopefully have more time for some fun things. So this particular book, 1,982 copies on the census. Number 12 on the list is Batman number 234. Now, this is often listed as the first Silver Age appearance of Two-Face. This is not the Silver Age. It's 1971. It's the Bronze Age, folks. And it's also a 25-cent cover. So DC in July of 1971 went from 15 cents to 25 cents and went from a 32-page count to a 52-page count. And it always looks, if you look at the side, the spine, it kind of, because it has that, almost looks like the spine of a book on the side. These are not square bound books. They're saddle stitched, right? Which means they're basically 13 wraps that are stapled together. Much like a regular comic book is 8 wraps stapled together. I'm pretty sure it's 13. Yeah. So they went from 15 cents to 25 cents. They stayed that way for an entire year through June of 1972. At any rate, Neil Adams cover, yet again. And return of Two-Face, who hadn't appeared as Two-Face, Batman dressed up as Two-Face in a World's Finest issue in the 60s, since the Golden Age, since the early 1950s. But remember, Two-Face was not a villain that was used in the TV series. Fun side note, Harlan Ellison had written an episode of Batman featuring Two-Face, but I think they found that the makeup would have been too difficult. They kind of went with False Face instead. Two-Face never appeared in the Batman TV series. But then when they did 2 animated films, about 10 years ago, which are worth checking out. They're probably on Max. The second one is that Harlan Ellison Two-Face story with William Shatner doing the voice of Two-Face. And, of course, Adam West and Burt Ward reprising their roles as Batman and Robin, and Julie Newmar and Lee Merriweather doing Catwoman and somebody kind of associated with Catwoman, let's say. Anyway, fun stuff. So this is the first kind of classic villain they bring back, but again, there was no connection to the TV series. So they were able to, Two-Face is pretty diabolical, and they were able to, have a more serious story with him. At any rate, this has a census count of 1,898. Talk about 25 cents. Let's go to number 13 on the list, back to Marvel. This is Amazing Spider-Man number 102. November of 1971. 4 months after DC made the switch, Marvel goes to 25 cents. They stayed there for a month. Okay, this is the second appearance of Morbius. Roy Thomas, Gil Kane, Frank Giacoya. And we now are in the picture frame era. 71, 72. I guess it started with these. I'm not sure. Let's see if we see a few more. I'm not sure it was consistent across the board that they got these picture frame covers, but that's what you'll see in 70 into 73, I think. I'm not sure exactly how it lasts, but you have the banner, Marvel Comics Group at the top, and you have the picture frame, right? Where you have the trade dress and there's a solid color on the sides, one side or both sides and the bottom. At any rate, that's what they're called. They're kind of fun to look at. We'll see all the 72 books will have that feature from Marvel Comics. And ASM 102 has a census count of 1,783. Number 14 on the list is Incredible Hulk 141, a Roy Thomas story, Herb Trimpe, cover and art. First appearance of Doc Samson, who is gamma irradiated, gets strength not equivalent to the Hulk's, played by Ty Burrell, but not in powered form in the Incredible Hulk movie. This, again, another character created by Roy Thomas, census count of 1,471. Next on the list, we go back to DC, and this is Superman 233. Denny O'Neil, E. Nelson Bridwell stories, Kurt Swan, Murphy Anderson art, and a Neil Adams cover. It's the Kryptonite Nevermore storyline. So this is where Denny O'Neil comes in to Superman. But he only stays in the title about a year. Kurt Swan is continuing to do the art. And with Murphy Anderson doing the inks, the combination known as Swanderson. And in this issue, an accident that is trying to use kryptonite as a power source ends up making it all into lead. But Superman is struck by the explosion. There's no longer any kryptonite, so there's a weakness to it, but it's in the desert, and he ends up in the sand. And then the radiation, some of his powers seep into the sand, and a sand Superman emerges, who would become his nemesis for the next number of months. But Superman would be somewhat depowered. It only lasted about a year, but Denny O'Neil tried to change it. And also, he left the Daily Planet and went to work as a TV news reporter for WGBS, introduced Morgan Edge's. I think this is Morgan Edge's first appearance in this one. Maybe it's the second. Anyway, Superman number 233, Neil Adams cover, census count 1,391. Let's stay with good old Neil. And Stan Lee did the drug issues in Spider-Man. This, DC did their drug issues. But what's interesting here is this is Green Lantern number 85, O'Neil and Adams. The anti-drug story, much more in your face, where the cover here, an amazing cover by Adams, has Speedy with the drugs actually on the table in front of him, and holding his arm where he had injected the heroin. I think it was heroin. Opium? Something bad for you. Directly. And this completely changed the character and completely changed comic books. This is like one of those things we're seeing this early Bronze Age stuff that never would have been dreamt of just earlier, just a few years earlier. But what's interesting is this has a cover date of August, September, right? Which is a month or two after the conclusion of the ASM 3-part drug storyline. This does have the Comics Code stamp on it. So the Comics Code was revising their standards, which they could tell some more mature stories, which we see here. And it also led to the introduction of horror elements into comic books again, which we will see play out a little bit in 1971 and more in 1972. So this landmark issue, and I think this is a really important storyline because, again, it's much more forward than the Spider-Man stories, and this changed the character Speedy for the rest, up till today, right? And it always like somebody who was struggling with his past, and not just Robin with a bow. This particular book has a census count of 1,384. The 9th Marvel book on the list is Conan the Barbarian number 3. Roy Thomas and Barry Windsor Smith on this one. It's based on one of Robert E. Howard's original stories, Spears of, I'm trying to read that, Clontarf? I guess it's just an early Conan that made the list. Were there that lack of other keys? Maybe. But this makes the list with a census count of 1,338. The 10th Marvel book on the list, not the last one we're going to talk about, is Amazing Spider-Man 96. Oddly, this was the first part of the storyline and has the fewest copies on the census. That doesn't quite make sense to me. But Stan Lee, Gil Kane, John Romita, Gil Kane cover. No Comics Code stamp. I'm kind of surprised that this is below the other two on the list, but a total census count of this one of 1,316. Let's go to the next book on the list, and we're going back to DC's ninth book, and this is Detective Comics number 411. This is the first appearance of Talia al Ghul. And, you know, we saw Raj, her dad, made his first appearance in Batman 232 in June. Well, here's Talia making her first appearance in Detective Comics in May. So she came out first. Again, a Neil Adams cover. Denny O'Neil did the story. Bob Brown, Dick Giordano, and Don Heck art. It's a 15 center. And what's interesting is, you know, again, Neil Adams is really elevating collector interest at this time. And the fact is that he was working for DC. Doesn't last that much longer, to be honest. Let's go back to Marvel for a minute, but we're going to kind of Marvel, kind of adjacent. This is Savage Tales number 1 for Marvel Comics. It is a magazine. This does not have a Comics Code stamp because it's a magazine. Comics Code did not influence magazines. But Stan Lee, Roy Thomas, Jerry Conway stories, John Buscema cover, Barry Windsor Smith, John Romita, Gray Morrow, Gene Colan, and one of the Buscema's art. I'm going to assume it's John. This is the second Conan comic title. Origin, but what makes this, other than the cover, it's the first appearance of Man-Thing. So Man-Thing was created by Jerry Conway. Now, as the story goes, so this has a May cover date, and remember the House of Secrets has a July cover date. So 2 months earlier. As the story goes, that Jerry Conway and Len Wein were roommates at the time. So I'm not sure how independently they came up with these ideas, but you have Swamp Thing and Man-Thing, which are both swamp creatures. Big, hulking, moss-covered swamp creatures. Interestingly, the original swamp creature, we'll talk about a little bit later in this video. We have a lot to talk about because this is like my wheelhouse. Wait till next year we're talking about 1972, which is like what I collect. I have almost every DC book from 72, and I have every Marvel key from 1972. I don't have them all graded, but I have them all. Anyway, first Man-Thing, and it is like I said, magazine size Savage Tales, which eventually allowed Conan to have his own title, Savage Sword of Conan. And you can see here, this publication is rated M for the mature reader because these books had more violence and they had nudity in them. I don't think there were any drugs in this one, though. We will talk about drugs in like 2 minutes. Like it'll be crazy, though. So this is Savage Tales number 1, census count of 958. The 10th book on the list from DC is Green Lantern number 86, the second part of the Speedy is a Junkie storyline. O'Neil and Adams and Giordano. Great cover. That classic pose of the Pieta-esque pose of Green Arrow carrying Speedy. He didn't die. Speedy was okay. He was messed up, but he wasn't dead. And so, again, another great Neil Adams cover. So it's interesting. I think of the 10 DC books, 3, 4, 6. No, 5 were Neil Adams covers. No, 6. Batman 232, Batman 234, Superman 233, the 2 Green Lanterns, and Detective 411. 6 Neil Adams covers, 3 Jack Kirby covers, and then House of Secrets 92, a Bernie Wrightson cover. That's interesting. 934 copies on the census. Let's stay with DC and we'll talk about horror. Actually, we'll go to Marvel for a minute. I'm sorry. Let's go to Marvel for a minute. Avengers number 85. This is the first appearance of the Squadron Supreme. The Marvel kind of DC amalgam characters where they had Hyperion, Nighthawk. What was the fast guy? Whizzer or Speed Demons? Whizzer, right? Whizzer and Dr. Dr. Spectrum, who were all they were Superman, Batman, Flash, and Green Lantern. Roy Thomas story. Great new characters created by Roy Thomas. There's a surprise. John Buscema, cover and art. This has a census count of 797. We'll stay with Avengers. Number 93. This is interesting. Roy Thomas story. Neil Adams and Tom Palmer cover and art. Now, Adams came back to Marvel this time, and this is the first chapter of the Kree-Skrull War. We see the picture frame cover. It's a 25-cent issue from November. You see any December issues, they're going to be back to 20 cents. And so it is a storyline that lasted for a few issues and one of the classic storylines of this particular time period. Now let's go back to DC. This is Weird War Tales number 1. Joe Kubert story, cover, and art, and combining the horror with the war books. This is one of the DC had changed House of Mystery, House of Secrets to horror anthologies for more sci-fi based stuff. They had Unexpected. They did the same thing with, and this is one of the new titles that they created. Now, in the next year or so, DC would get all sorts of weird because they'd have Weird Western, they'd have Weird Worlds. Adventure Comics would not officially be titled, but it'd be Weird Adventure Comics for a minute. I think there was one other weird thing that I'm not thinking of off the top of my head. Weird War Tales did run for 124 issues up to 1983. Eventually, the Creature Commandos made their first appearance in this, but it was mostly an anthology title of World War II based horror stories. So you just get a lot of skeletons, ghosts, and stuff on the cover. But DC Bronze Age horror has become quite popular among collectors recently because it's a little harder to find. Like I said, with House of Secrets 92, people weren't collecting it the same way they were Superman and Batman or Spider-Man and the Jack Kirby stuff. So a little bit harder to find, especially in high grade. 514 copies on the census. Now, let's talk about drugs. This is the first book from outside of Marvel and DC. It is from Hell Comics. It is Air Pirate Funnies number 1. Oh boy, if you don't know about Air Pirates Funny number 1, buckle up, folks. This is an underground book. Mickey Mouse meets the Air Pirates Funnies. Nick's Kids, adults only. And it has a Dell logo on it and everything. Well, it's an underground comic, right? Bobby London in the cover. I think it was Dan O'Neill, not Denny O'Neill. No relation, not the same spelling. Dan O'Neill did the story and art, I think, of the Mickey Mouse storyline. Banned from future sales and reprinting after settlement of Disney lawsuit. Dirty Duck and Dope and Dan appearance. So the Air Pirates were, I think, a protagonist of Mickey Mouse in the comic strips in the 30s and 40s. And this is kind of what this is based on. There were 2 issues. And you can see here, Mickey Mouse is smuggling dope. And he's, I think, combating the Air Pirates. There's sex in this. The Donald Duck is one of him and somebody else are referred to as the Dirty Perverts. There's some short stories in here. It's a black and white book. It is bonkers. It is available on the internet, but this is for adults only, my friends, not for kids, as it says on the cover here. The Internet Archive actually has it. And the first page of the Mickey Mouse story is like wackadoodle hilarious. Like, it is just so, and it's, I mean, you know, I don't know what they thought they could get away with. And it was 1971. So maybe maybe Disney's litigious reputation was not as widespread, but they were all over this. And they sued them. They sued them for like, I think like $180,000 in sales lost and $2 million in damages. Sued this guy who was just, making independent comic books. He didn't have the money to pay it. He never paid them. Right. So it kept going lawsuit after lawsuit. And finally, Disney settled out of court. And the win, right? So I think it was Dan O'Neill told his lawyer, well, I won. No, you lost. You didn't win the lawsuit, but he won because he didn't have to go to prison. So this is a bonkers book. And it is for adults only. So this is totally underground comic books. It is sought out by collectors, and there are a lot of them graded. 357 on the census. There were 2 issues of it. Let's get back to normality for a moment. DC horror. This is Ghosts #1. Leo Dorfman story. This is a Nick Cardy cover. We're going to talk about Nick Cardy covers quite a bit over the next couple of years for DC. He kind of replaced Neil Adams as the cover artist de jour for DC. He did a lot of covers, including titles that he wasn't working on. But this is Ghosts, popping up much like Weird War Tales. This particular book ran for 112 issues all the way through 1982, and again, it is an anthology title. At this point in time, no continuing characters in the book. Let's go back to Marvel. Now, this is a little bit different, right? This is Fantastic Four #110. It's the first cover appearance of Agatha Harkness, but this particular one is the green printing error. And if you look at it, I guess the reds and the greens or something got inverted in the printing process, and they printed a number of copies, not a small number, but it was stopped. So like the thing is green instead of orange. The uniforms are pink instead of blue. The yellow seemed to work out okay, right? And the brown, but the faces are green. So maybe the red and blue got inverted. Was that what it was? I'm not exactly sure, but this printing error is coveted by collectors because it's one of the few kind of widespread printing errors for a semi-key at the time. There are some other slight variants, but they're very few of them. There aren't enough. This particular one does have enough that it has a census count of 251, but there are no 9/8 on the census. Moving right along, DC horror. This is DC 100-page super spectacular #4. Weird Mystery Tales. This is the first issue of the title. Nobody knows where the first 3 issues went. Nobody knows why this starts with issue #4. But you got a Bernie Wrightson cover. The back cover is the same cover with no trade dress. So it's like the Virgin cover on the back, much like the Gold Key books of the 60s. Just a great Wrightson cover. A hard book to get in high grade because of that black, and it's also a 100-page square bound. So this is a harder book to get, but it started the run. I think it went through issue 22 of 100-page super spectacular, and there are a total of 238 copies on the census. We're going to spend most of the time talking about the other publishers now. Gold Key, their top book, Star Trek #9. Len Wein did the story of this one, photo cover, and notice once again that Spock is more prominent than Kirk on the covers here. Is that from Amok Time, where he has a little sash around him? Spock does not look well here, does he? Anyway, Star Trek #9, top Gold Key book, 133 copies on the census. Warren Publication, their top book is Vampirella #11. This is the first appearance of, and I have to try to read this, Pendragon. And last Tom Sutton art. But what makes this coveted, why this particular issue is the best one, it's a Frank Frazetta cover. Again, this is magazine sized, a little more maturity. That the horror was in the magazines at this point in time before it was in the comic books. This has a census count of 131. Let's go to Archie. Archie also kind of embracing horror, right? This is Sabrina the Teenage Witch #1. Frank Doyle and Dick Malmgren stories. Basically a Dan DiCarlo cover. So Sabrina is 9 years old by this point. She had made her first appearance in 1962 in Archie's Madhouse #22, gets her own series. There was kind of this Archie horror that they were promoting at the time. It's Archie horror. It's not, really that horrific. It's some little wolf man, but Sabrina's a witch. There was an animated series. There was a live action series, a more recent Netflix live action series. So Sabrina's become a very popular character over the years. Top Archie book, census count of 109. We're going back underground. the top book from Rip Off Press. This is the Fabulous Furry Freak Brothers #1. They got their own title. Were they in Feds and Heads previously? Gilbert Shelton is the creator. He did the stories and the artwork. There are 2 variations of first printing. These books, it's hard to tell with these underground books what's what printing. Usually the cover price will give it away. Subsequent printings have higher cover prices because they came out later in inflation, especially in the 1970s. 95 copies on the Census. Next book is from Almighty Publishing. It is Funny Book #1. And this does have who did the cover here? Rick Flug, Trina Robbins, Gilbert Shelton contributed to this. But this is key, and I think a lot of people don't realize this. This is the first appearance of Cherry Pop-Tart. Well known among perverts. The kind of an Archie-esque underground character, right? Who went a little bit, like, it wasn't known as underground by the time she was popularized. Larry Welts created it. Kind of in the Dan DiCarlo Archie style. So Funny Book #1 has 73 copies on the Census. We're going to stay with the undergrounds. San Francisco's top book. This is Mr. Natural #2. Robert Crumb, 63 copies on the Census. Let's go to a little tamer. Let's give the kids something to think about. This is from Gold Key, not their top book, but this is Pink Panther #1, the first appearance of Pink Panther in comic books, based on an animated series, which was based on the title of a 1964 Blake Edwards film starring Peter Sellers as Inspector Clouseau. So it was called the Pink Panther because that was the name of the diamond, but now you have a panther who's actually pink that's being chased by this kind of hapless French detective. 56 copies on the Census. Let's go back to the undergrounds. From Apex Novelties, Your High Tone Comics with an X #1. Robert Crumb did the book, and this is definitely for adults because I don't know why that I'm blacking out a good part of the cover here because, you could probably figure out what he's doing. And there's also some very racist stuff going on. Your High Tone Comics, 52 copies on the Census. From Skywald. This is interesting. This is a magazine. It's Hellrider #1. Right on with the now superhero. Beginning the origin, right? So it's this superhero who's driving a motorcycle, and there's Butterfly, who's the first African-American heroine in comic books. What's interesting is Gary Friedrich wrote the script. A year later, he created Ghost Rider for Marvel Comics. So obviously he was into motorcycles. This is the top book from Skywald. Skywald published a number of books around this time. I made mention that came out this year was Heap #1, which was news stories based on the character that appeared in the Hillman comics of the 1940s as kind of like a supporting character in some Airboy stories. It was quite popular and made the comeback. Anyway, your Hellrider #1, 43 copies on the Census. Let's go back and have something for the kids. Harvey Comics, Richie Rich Fortunes #1. I usually say for no particular reason, but it's a #1. A lot of file copies. Ernie Colon art. This book has 37 copies on the Census. Top Charlton book. Charlton, they moved away from the superheroes. They had some licensed properties. And here, their top book is Haunted #1. Steve Ditko cover and art. So they're also going in the horror route. That would be a lot of what Charlton is known for in the 1970s were the horror books. This ran for 75 issues all the way through 1984. I don't know. There have to be people out there that are trying to collect the run of Haunted, and I have to imagine that is a little bit challenging. 32 copies on the Census. Let's go back to the undergrounds. Kitchen Sink Press. This is Homegrown Funnies. Robert Crumb, story and art. And Crumb is quite prolific. We talked about how Dennis Kitchen, the publisher of Kitchen Sink, they became a little bit more mainstream. They did have more adult-themed stuff in the 1980s, but they did Spirit reprints and everything else. This is their top book, and it has a census count of 22. From Print Mint, their top book is Junk Waffle #1. I have no idea what this is about. It's done by Vaughn Bode. I don't know. It looks like a duck in outer space. It is for adults only. No idea. Let me know in the comments if you know anything about Junk Waffle. This has a copy of 19 copies on the census. The top book from Company and Sons is Dan O'Neill's Comics and Stories, #1. And it looks like one of the three little pigs is blowing the brains out of the big bad wolf. Again, Dan O'Neill was the guy who was one of the creators of Air Pirates Funnies. So this is very similar in that vein. 17 copies on the census. Next up, the top book from National Lampoon is National Lampoon #13. There we go. Which is a kind of one of these weird tales. Knockoffs, but this is also, and this is kind of interesting. I wasn't aware of this. This is Weird Tales, Spicy Stories. It's a Frank Frazetta cover. National Lampoon 13 is a Frank Frazetta cover. That is interesting. And it's one of these things that, kind of. This is like a fine for $20. I might have to pick myself up an issue of this, just because it's a Frazetta cover and it's kind of a, as I go through these, I have far too much, driving me to say, oh, I want this book, I want that book, because it's, it's easy to do that. So anyway, National Lampoon #13, Frank Frazetta cover. That's what's going to make it the most popular issue of the year. There are 13 copies in the census. Ties it with the top book from Dell. Dell has kind of fallen, right? Air Pirates Funnies did a lot better than any of their titles. This is the Beverly Hillbillies #21. It's got a photo cover. So the Beverly Hillbillies premiered in 1972 on CBS, starring Buddy Ebsen, Irene Ryan, Max Baer, and Donna Douglas. It was about these hillbillies who discover oil on their land, and then they have so much money they go to live in Beverly Hills, and hijinks ensue. So the show was canceled in 1971. So this would have come out, I don't know if this is the last issue. This would have come out probably after the show was already canceled. If it's cover dated October, it probably came out during the summer, so there maybe it's still been reruns on of the Beverly Hillbillies. But it was part of CBS's Rural Purge of 1971, where advertisers wanted to appeal to a more urban audience, and so they canceled like Mayberry RFD and Green Acres, I think Hee Haw, all the shows that kind of were more rural shows, and they CBS then would end up having All in the Family and MASH and Mary Tyler Moore and shows like that maybe appeal to a more urban audience, and the advertisers were going to get more spending money from the urban audiences. So that's what happened. Anyway, the Beverly Hillbillies ran for 9 years. There was a movie in the 90s which was not good, and there are 13 copies on the census. Up next is the top book from Erie Publications. It is Tales of Voodoo, Volume 4, #2, Dick Ayers art. This is kind of like the guy. There's blood. It looks like, The Shocking Weird Terror of the Dead. It looks like a robot paramedic. Anyway, Tales of Voodoo has 11 copies on the census. The next book is Color. no number. This is the top book from Victor Moscoso, who did the story, the cover, and the art. It looks pretty trippy. It's for adults only. It's $1, which is twice what most of the undergrounds are at this time. I know nothing about it. Let me know if you do. 10 copies on the Census, which ties it with Classics Illustrated Junior, number 535, HRN number 576, from Gilberton, top book from Gilberton. Gilberton's not publishing new stuff anymore. They're publishing reprints of Classics Illustrated and Classics Illustrated Junior. I've often said this. Okay, if you come across a collection, one of the worst things you come across is a collection of Valiant from the 90s. Because a lot of that is worth nothing. There are some that do have value in there, though, but there's so many of them out there. Then even worse than that is Classics Illustrateds, right? There's so many Classics Illustrateds out there, and there's so many HRN numbers. The sci-fi, the horror adaptations do have value, but even worse than Classics Illustrated is Classics Illustrated Stinkin' Junior. But this is the Wizard of Oz. Somehow there are 10 copies on the Census. Our next book is the top book from EC. This is Mad, number 147. No. I'm not sure why. 8 copies on the Census. How about Last Gasp, which is one of the undergrounds? There were 3 books that all had the same census count. Laugh in the Dark, number 1. Kim Deitch cover. Binky Brown appearance. This is a Christmas issue, I guess. That's tied with... what is it tied with? Slow Death, number 3, which is a Richard Corbin cover and also has interior art. So that Corbin aspect is going to make it popular among collectors. And that also ties it with Tortoise and the Hare, which doesn't have a number, but this is not your classic Tortoise and the Hare story. They're just hanging out and they're smoking weed. Gary Hallgren story and art. Dan O'Neill also involved in this. Dirty Duck and Trotz and Bonnie backup stories. All of these have 7 copies on the Census, which ties it with 2 other books. Top book from Promethean Enterprises, which is Promethean Enterprises number 3. Richard Corbin and Robert Crumb. And Crumb did the cover. 7 copies on the Census. It's magazine sized. And that also ties it with the top book from Texas Trio, which is Dr. Weird number 2. Talking about Dr. Weird number 1 from last year. I don't know. This is Jim Starlin did the art in this, part of the art. It does look like a Starlin cover. It is. He signed it. I can't find these anywhere. They I think and George R.R. Martin had written one of the stories in issue number 1. This also has 7 copies on the Census, and we're going to round out the year of 1971 with the top book from Wallace Wood. It is Wit's End number 8. Ralph Reese did the cover and art, and just kind of, this is more independent than underground. Wallace Wood having his own books at the time. And this is also magazine sized. And that's going to do it. That's going to do it for 1971. A lot of changes going on in comics. As culture, the counterculture of the 1960s is starting to influence comic books. And we are seeing a movement towards more mature themes. More so than the introduction of new characters. Because if we look at the top 10, we have Morbius, Raj Al Ghul, Swamp Thing, and the Defenders and the Fourth World characters. But a lot of what we have, including the top independent book, is kind of drug related, to be honest with you. Both in terms of the underground aspect to it and the anti-drug message for both Marvel and DC. So that's going to do it for 1971. I am looking forward to 1972 because that is the year I started reading comic books. And that is the part of the collection that I'm focusing on. If you watch the channel at all, you know I'm trying to get every DC book from 1972. And I'm pretty close. I just got to put everything together and figure out exactly what I have because I'm a complete mess here in my basement. But you can see up there, a little preview. Those two boxes have a lot of my DC 72 collection. I also have some slabs of them. So thank you for stopping by. I do appreciate it. You can take a look at a couple of my other videos here. And this is Jim saying until next time, enjoy your comics.